Hey all, I'm so glad to have on the show today Mr. Chris Butterworth, a mentor and support for myself, good friend. I've been fortunate enough to write a book recently also with Chris and Stephen Dargan, Leading Excellence. Today we're on to talk with Chris about another book he's just had released called Why Care. This book is going to be a great one to really get into. It's such an important aspect in today's world. We're going to unpack everything about the book, all the learnings. But Chris has kindly given us a link to his website, which is whycarebook.com. And at that website, you can link to get hold of the book, and at a special rate for a limited time, there's a 20% off offer. So I hope you all enjoy. Great book and a great topic. Let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where we aim to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve and create enduring, high-performance, low-impact enterprises. Learn how to enhance morale, customer and purpose centricity, focus, and calmness. Learn how to create and sustain a culture of excellence at all levels of your organisation.
Welcome to episode 175 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Mr. Chris Butterworth back on the show with us today. Chris has kindly been on the show with us discussing creating a culture of continuous improvement and excellence 2 times before. Chris is the author of the book 4+1, Essence of Excellence, Why Bother, and Enterprise and Alignment and Results. Chris is on the show today to discuss his new book, Why Care, written together with Chris Warner and Caroline Greenlee. Let's get into the episode. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Brad. It's a real pleasure. It's nice to be back again.
Yeah, ditto. Really looking forward to the conversation. Chris, why care? You know, you had the book Why Bother, and now you've got this new book just out, Why Care. What led you down the path of writing this book?
It's a really interesting story, actually, a personal story, because why bother? It's very much about the assessment systems that are required, and encourage people to design their own assessment systems, but focused on behaviours to make sure you've got the right behaviours needed for culture of continuous improvement. So myself and Chris Warner were actually on a site doing an assessment together, and we knew each other a little bit, but we got to know each other really well and spent the whole week together. And we were sat in the airport at the end of the assessment, and Chris is a real expert on psychological safety and the importance of caring for people. We were kicking it around, and we said, well, it's really clear to us that psychological safety and continuous improvement are, in effect, 2 sides of the same coin. And yet that's not something that we've seen discussed or made explicit anywhere. Lots of great work done on each, but often independently. So we just kicked that around, and because we said, well, maybe it's a book. So the timing of that was about 3 months before COVID broke out, and so we started talking about it, and then the COVID got in the way, and put it on hold. But then when things settled down, we got back together again, and we decided we needed a bit of help. So Peter Hines had also been doing a lot of research in this with myself and Caroline Greenlee, and Caroline is a CI professional and a great coach and has lots of experience in psychology. So we thought, well, the 3 of us will get together and write this book about how you cannot really have a culture of continuous improvement unless you've got psychological safety in place. It's the foundation for it.
Yeah, I think, Chris, that's really interesting. I love that thought and the process of looking at psychological safety and CI, and my mind's running with a lot of different thoughts on it. But what's your view on the real criticality of psychological safety to actually create a culture of continuous improvement?
Well, it's what we've got in the book is some real interesting insights. There's a lot of research gone into the book. I don't think I've ever read as many books to write on as I had this one. Whole areas of things that we needed to understand. So we start with some foundational things, and we say, well, basic understanding of the brain, because we're all different. So the key thing, one of the key understandings is that every individual counts. So what we talk about is we use a model, the white care model, start as the individual at the center. So it starts from the inside out. And rather than us trying to say to people, we know what's good for you, we need to ask people what's good for them. And we need to connect people to the purpose of the organization and make sure that they feel that they've got an environment where they can contribute. So that's one key aspect, is that start with the individual, start with that inside out. And then you've got the foundation, a couple of foundations would be, as I mentioned, the brain. Another foundation we think is diversity, equity, inclusion, and development. Because again, unless you've got that in place, then you're not going to get psychological. And underpinning all of that is the principle of respecting every individual. So actually, we talk a lot about respect in terms of creating a safe environment, but people often immediately translate that as a physically safe environment, which is important. But actually, without psychological safety, people won't contribute ideas. They won't speak up. They won't be willing to challenge some stuff even when they know it's wrong. So it actually, if we don't address it, we run the risk of, well, more than that, we actually will not have a culture of continuous improvement unless we seriously think about psychological safety.
Yeah, it's interesting there, Chris, that piece you mentioned about respect, where it's so much driven typically to physical safety. But you mentioned that without psychological safety, one thing you'll see is people not speaking up. And is that a typical indicator that you'd go, right, if you're running a meeting or you're running a huddle or a toolbox or whatever you're running, and there is dead silence day after day after day after day, could you fairly predict that the psychological safety levels are not good in that team?
Great question, great observation too. It's telling you something's wrong, isn't it? So why aren't people feeling comfortable to speak up? So yes, that's a really good indicator. And a lot of great companies have put in place ISO 45,000, which is the global standard on health and safety. But fewer are aware of ISO 45,003, which only came out a couple of years ago, and that's actually a separate standard for psychological health and safety. Now it's linked, so it says implement 45,000 first and then do 45,000. But that is a really nice starting point for an organizational level to say, oh, actually, what does this mean? How do we make sure we've got psychological safety? So there's a lot of evidence that this is important. There's horrifying statistics around it that people without psychological safety people are very disengaged. Some research in the book we talk about is that for most people, the direct line manager has more impact on the psychological safety than the partner.
Wow.
So we have a duty of care. All leaders actually have a duty of care to recognize the impact we have on psychological safety. And one of the key concepts in the book is that we all have a finite amount of capacity in our brains and to process ideas and improvement. So if we have got a lack of psychological safety and our thoughts are all compressed into worrying about what's happening, is it safe to speak up? You've got no capacity to think about it. So you have to create that psychological capacity in order to create an environment where people feel they can make a contribution.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty easy indicator to look for, isn't it? If you go, right, well, how many voices are being shared in meetings and team meetings, and it's potentially a baseline of psychological safety. But then, like you said, Chris, without that baseline, there could be stresses, pressures, emotions, all sorts of things hanging around that I'm guessing too can lead to physical safety also, because if you're not conscious at work, there's a big outcome there with potential physical safety too.
Absolutely, the two are very intertwined. So lots of physical safety issues lead to psychological safety issues, and vice versa. But and we recognise that in the book. There's a section on it in the book, but the book we thought we can't make the main focus physical safety. There's a lot of really great books on that already. But acknowledging that the two are very much codependent.
Yeah. Yeah. And Chris, I want to come back to the piece you mentioned in the book that you've really looked a lot about the piece of everybody counts and having the human at the center. But that trick of the language we use as a leader, whether I guess I heard you say, do we actually take the time to truly try to understand the individual?
Yeah.
Do we use language and come across in a way that I guess they feel like, wow, you truly want to know me, you truly want to learn?
Yeah.
What's that look like, Chris? Because I guess there's a lot of leaders we could probably think, yeah, we lead from the front, we go down and talk to employees, but do we really?
Do we really listen? Do we talk to them or do we listen to them? And I think that's the key. A really important concept in the book is what we call thriving plans. So what we describe in the book is that every individual needs a thriving plan. And that thriving plan is not just a personal development plan, that might be one element of it. It's actually a personal well-being plan, a psychological well-being plan. And it's got lots of different elements to it. But you say, well, every individual needs a thriving plan. But it's also a bit more than that, because one of the chapters in the book is talks about the importance of teams in terms of psychological safety. So every team should have a thriving plan as well. And leaders get a hard time often, but leaders are also individuals. So leaders should have a thriving plan. And it's often very lonely for leaders. So one of the things about the thriving plan is all the time creating an environment where it's okay to share these things and talk about them. We all get that from each other. So it becomes a two-way conversation. And finally, the organization needs a thriving plan. And so this concept of thriving plan is that how do we help people to thrive? Because the tagline of the book is thriving individuals create thriving culture of continuous improvement for organizations, because that's what they do. If people feel safe, they're going to contribute great ideas. If we create an environment where those ideas are recognized and implemented and acknowledged, we'll get even more of them. So leaders need to practice listening. We talk about a lot of that in the book in much more depth. Is people feel valued when they listen to. And so we recommend using a lot of techniques that people are familiar with, like listen, learn walks, for example, and visual management boards, key behavioral indicators, but put in a different lens on them, put in a lens of psychological safety onto those things.
Yeah.
It does really think very differently about what you're looking for. Should I go and do, if I go and do a look, listen, learn more focused on psychological safety, what am I going to look for? That was a great example that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Chris, one other question I've got on the piece of psychological safety is I've seen in teams that when teams share an idea and it might get passed up the ladder because it can't be handled by them and they don't hear back, I see that leads to people not talking anymore, where it's like, I've provided my ideas, heard nothing back, I'm just going to shut up now and do my job. So is that a connection to psychological safety, would you say, Chris?
There's lots and lots of elements. And rarely is it any one thing that's going to get wrong. Often it's a combination of things, because you've got personal factors as well as workplace factors, social factors coming in. So it's quite a complicated mix. But something like as basic as that, first and foremost, we're not showing respect. If we're asking people to do stuff and then we don't acknowledge it, then we're not showing respect. And when people feel disrespected, it's going to have an impact on how they feel. Because first and foremost, that we feel things, and then we think about stuff. So if our feelings are negative, then that's going to have a negative impact on our psychological safety.
Yeah, too true. Oh, thanks, Chris. Chris, you mentioned the topic of diversity and psychological safety, and that you've written about that in the book. What are the key aspects of diversity that you bring into play and have written about there?
Well, Caroline, it's a big focus of mine in the book. And it's quite fascinating when you start thinking about it, because I think we often have too narrow an interpretation of what we mean by diversity. So, people might default to say, oh, is it male female diversity? Is it ethnic diversity? But it's actually also those which are both very valid. But it's also about diversity of the way we think. We approach things in different ways. The diversity in background. So diversity in every sense of the word. There's lots of research shows that the more diversity that we have, the better the outcome's going to be in terms of the solutions that we come up with. So one of the key roles of leaders is to actually support that diversity, but not just in a tacit way in terms of saying, yeah, we want diversity, but actually maybe even facilitating diverse teams so they work out how to work together and how to manage that diversity, because it might not be easy. It might be much harder. It is much harder initially to work in a team that's of a really diverse way of thinking, because sometimes you won't understand where the other person's coming from. Actually, that's good, because that means, oh, right, okay, they're looking at this in a completely different way. What am I missing? But we might not have that.
Yeah.
So think about it.
Chris, you're making me think of a thing that I do. I'm a trainer in insights, which is, some people might know of DISC, but it's a quite advanced way to personality profile. And one of the key insights in that training is, I guess, to think about your partner, and is your partner the same as you? And often everyone goes, no, they're completely different. And yeah. And then we go, so what are your colleagues at work like? Are they? And a lot of the time people are like, oh, we're all pretty well the same, and you go, well, why do we have diversity at home, and we genetically or subconsciously marry and connect in that way for diversity? But then at work, we can sometimes flock to people who are the same as us. And I think one thing that always gets raised there is safety. And to me, they're saying like, it's safety in people who are the same. And I'm hearing they're saying, well, we haven't got a psychologically safe environment, so I flock to people who are like me to be safe, which is an interesting concept. I'm by no means delved deep into that, but
no, it is challenging to work with people who think differently than yourself. Yeah? But that's not a bad thing, and that's what we need. That's what we need to recognise, is actually that challenge is good, because that's going to result in us thinking better about it.
Well, it certainly works on the home front. That diversity of thought and the diversity of thinking and the way that we raise our kids. Like, if we were both the same on the home front, my goodness, that would not be a good outcome.
And no one's got the answer to everything. And every time I see a problem-solving activity done by a diverse team, the outcome is tremendous, far stronger than if it's a team of people who just all think the same way and will almost know what's going to come out before they even have the conversation, because they've all decided subconsciously who it's going to be. So the skill is to value that, really value that sort of recognize it's a good thing.
Yeah, I can see how it would drive psychological safety and create that environment. And I guess you need that foundation to enable that diversity to come out too.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm really looking forward to reading the book further and getting more into it. And thank you for sharing some insights on the book to come now. What would be your enterprise excellence 2-minute tip to anyone in this field where you're like, I want to improve psychological safety within my workplace?
So that leads me on to one of the key aspects that we talk about in the book, is the need to consider what our psychological safety system is and how does it integrate with our continuous improvement system. And at the moment, what we've seen so far is very few organizations do that. Okay? So I put a CI system in place, but if I don't think about how I'm going to create psychological safety, the chances of that continuous improvement system being successful are not very high. It'll work to an extent, but you won't get an optimum, probably sustainable. So key enterprise excellence tip really is ask yourself the question: how well is our psychological safety system integrated into our CI system? Do they support each other? And so far what we've seen is lots of people are going, why we haven't really thought about that yet. So it's the next thing to start considering.
So it sounds to me, Chris, like really the whole system of how do we create leadership capability to be able to lead with respect, to consider every individual and get to know the individual and then lead the individual, but the team and the organization, like you said. And then also, how do we improve our diversity system, both from a thought point of view, but how we embrace different thought, but also diversity in people.
Yeah. And in recruitment, building the teams.
It's amazing. Thanks, mate. Chris, you're covering such a diverse range of research and writing and in the books that you've written, and why care is really taking it to another level, and I credit you for that. But what's been a recent insight for you, mate? In all this learning you've done and all that knowledge you put down, what's been a most recent insight for you?
Well, I think the key thing to point out is this book is a collaboration. And so none of it would be possible to try and do on my own. I'm not even the main writer in this one. So this is, I think it's a great example of that diversity being powerful. So that I actually think the whole concept of the book is probably my biggest insight recently, is the power of the individual, but also the criticality of psychological safety. And it's not something that as a CI professional, I in the past have given anywhere near enough attention to.
Yeah, that's a good insight. That's a good insight. I think with where you were going there, Chris, too, with having 3 authors, like for everyone, Chris and I and Stephen Dargan are working on a book right now. And one insight I've had, Chris, is just the level of knowledge that's come from the 3 different people to create what we'll eventually talk about there. We'll get you on to talk about that. But just that diversity of thought, diversity of knowledge, it's so much more powerful than the individual, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you've got to create the environment where the individual feels they can contribute and they're respected as an individual before you get that collaboration with them.
Yeah, and you get it, and gold comes from it, just like Why Care and other books that you've written in collaboration. It's a credit to you. Chris, how can people reach out to you and get hold of the book, Why Care?
So the book's published by Routledge, so it will be on the Routledge website. It'll also be on Amazon. It'll be available as an ebook. At the end of this podcast, we'll put a link for the pre-order. It'll be on the shelf on the 3rd of June this year.
Great, Chris. Well, Chris, thanks for everything you have done and you continue to do to help us create a better future, mate. Really appreciate it. And thanks for coming on the show again.
Right, thanks for the opportunity.
Cheers, Chris. Bye for now. What a great episode. Remember, you can go to the whycarebook.com website to get access to the book at special rates for a limited time. It's a really good offer to be able to take hold of right now. There were 3 key takeaways for me from this episode. Firstly, everybody counts. Put the person at the center of our thinking. It's such a simple concept, but so powerful. And what Chris unpacked on this whole concept of everybody counts is so important. Naturally, through that approach and thinking, you create an organization of psychological safety, but also an organization where everyone feels respected and engaged. The second key takeaway for me was diversity and people and the diversity of thought that it brings. When we're all the same with the common traits, common background, there's a real risk of bias. When you bring diversity into a team, diversity of people, diversity of thought, great things happen. It's been studied and proven time and time again, and Chris and his co-authors have unpacked this for us also in Why Care. The third key takeaway for me is just the aspect of respect every individual. This is at the heart of enterprise excellence, at the heart of Toyota. That's such a researched and studied company in this field. Obviously, when you respect every individual, psychological safety rears up. People are engaged, we involve everyone, we bring out the best in everyone. And when we have action we need to do or something requested from someone, we respect them with prompt feedback, even if we can't do it. Simple behaviors that lead to great results in an organization. Thanks again for your time, Chris. Thanks for all you're doing, sharing your knowledge and helping us create a better future. Bye for now.